All right, I want to raise the energy in the room for 1 second.
Wow.
Hi, my name is Cliff Weitzman, and I'm the founder of a company called Speechify. I love giving these talks in schools because a couple of years ago, I was sitting exactly where you guys are, and I had the exact same questions that you guys just asked. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a quick background about me and how I ended up working on Speechify, how I ignored the things that friends of mine were doing, how I tested the idea, how I decided to come up with it and stick with it and not go into other things. And then I'm going to do a couple of questions for Alexander. And then I'll give you guys a chance to ask as many questions as you want. Does that sound good? Awesome, perfect. So I originally grew up in a small town called Ra'anana, about 20 minutes north of Tel Aviv in Israel. When I was a kid, I wanted to be Prime Minister of Israel, a billionaire, and a pop star, all at the same time. And eventually I realized, if I want to do these things, it's an important thing to be able to read. And the challenge was, I'm really, really bad at reading. So first, second, third, fourth grade, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't figure it out. Come on in. I couldn't figure it out. And so turns out I have dyslexia. So dyslexia is like neurodiverse function of the brain that makes it a little bit more difficult to pay attention to what's called phonemic awareness. And essentially it means my spelling is really bad and I read really slowly. And I also have ADHD, as you can probably guess. And so I really struggled. And eventually my dad started reading books to me. And my favorite book was Harry Potter, because everybody else got to read Harry Potter, and whenever I would try, I'd fall asleep in the book. And so what he would do is, though he worked pretty late, he would record himself on a cassette tape reading Harry Potter in Hebrew, and I would listen to that before I go to sleep. I fell in love with books. And when I moved to the US when I was 13, I moved to California, I found an audiobook set of Harry Potter in English, and I listened to that thing 22 times in a row, and to this day, I still have the first chapter of Harry Potter memorized. In high school, it was really difficult for me to read. My mom had to read some of my books to me, and when I got to college, I figured, you know what? The only way that this is going to work is if either someone reads to me or I get better at reading, which I've been trying for like 10 years now unsuccessfully. So I just built a text-to-speech tool that would read out everything to me. And that worked really well. But it was not a company. It was like a little hack that I had built on the side. There's an essay by Emerson called On Wealth, where he talks about the idea of creating value. And he explains that the steam engine was built by this guy, Thomas Savery. And he basically applied his thought to matter, rearranged a couple of atoms in his garage, and turned a bunch of scrap metal into a steam engine. And now you can pump water out of wells. You can power cars. You can power trains. You can create electricity. To me, creating value is like magic. It's the closest thing that humans can do, and I'm obsessed with it. I think it's so cool. And so when I was a student in university, I just loved building things. At Brown, where I went to school, there's a lot of people there who are there actually for athletics. They're a really good football player, or they're a really good swimmer. And I noticed that they would do practices for 4 hours a day, every single day, and on the weekends, they'd have games. And I decided, okay, I'm going to be exactly like them. I'm going to take all the normal classes I'm going to take, but instead of being a professional athlete, I'm going to be a professional maker. And I would just tinker with things. And so I built about 36 products when I was a student in college. The first thing I built was a 3D printed skateboard brake. I like riding skateboards, and the problem is I had friends who kept crashing on my board and injuring their knees. And I figured, okay, well, I'm asking them to like stick their foot out and drag it on the floor when going like 20 miles per hour down a hill. There must be a better way. Turns out there's no brakes for skateboards out there. So I designed one. I like sat and I sketched it in my dorm room, and I searched on Google Patents. I couldn't find any patents. And then I figured out how to learn how to do 3D printing and CAD modeling, and I printed one. And I think I printed maybe like 40 different versions until I had one that was good. And then people started to buy this brake for longboards. And the problem was that if you're dyslexic and you're very bad at coding because you misspell variables all the time and the software always breaks, I wasn't good at coding. And so eventually I started doing hackathons. It's a weekend where you go to a place and for 3 days, you just make stuff with other people who like making stuff. Typically, you're coding something. And the first 8 hackathons I didn't know how to code. So I would jump on a table, do a backflip, and tell people what I wanted to build, and people joined the team. So that was great. And I won half of them. And the problem is, when I would leave the hackathon, no one would keep working on the product anymore. And I'd be in school, like dying to make this like website or this iPhone app or whatever work, but I had to convince other people to do the work. And I realized that if I actually wanted to make progress myself, I had to learn how to code myself. And I enrolled in a computer science class when I was a second-year student in college. And my aptitude for computer science was very low. Like the first assignment took most people about 3 hours to finish. It took me 15. But I decided that if I wanted to be the person that I wanted to be, in the same way that I had to practice reading really hard, I had to practice coding very hard. And even if it was 4x, 5x more than other people did, that's what I had to do. And so what I would do is I'd go to the dining hall, And when nobody was looking, I would take a bag of bread and I'd make 8 peanut butter sandwiches and I'd put it inside the bag and I'd go to the computer science lab and I would sit there from 8 in the morning until midnight every single day. And if I had other homework for other classes, I would do it there. I would only leave for classes, and for 2 months, all I did was try to learn how to code. And for the first 2 months, I was very bad. But 2 months in, I started to be able to tell the difference between a bug that was because of a spelling mistake and a bug because of the actual code. And one thing that came out of this is I'm still one of the best debuggers that I know. I can find issues in software very, very quickly because that's just all I tried to figure out how to do. And I realized that I'm actually good at algorithmic thinking. I'm just very bad at implementing my ideas. And so I took a grand total of 3 computer science classes my entire time in university. But what I did is I found a website called Udemy. It's very similar to YouTube. And I found a course by this guy called Rob Percival, who used to teach math at Cambridge. And he would narrate himself building iPhone apps. And this course, I think it was 24 hours, and he'd build 19 apps. And it's like mini clones of Instagram and Tinder and Uber. And so I did it. I just looked at what he did, and then I did it. And then I looked at what he did, and then I did it. And then I took a similar course about how to make websites. And so I got really good at making websites. Not really good, but good enough. I probably wouldn't get hired at any legitimate company, but if I wanted to make something, I could make it. But the great part is I had a folder on my computer with 19 apps that I built and 15 websites that I built. And if I wanted to make a new website, I'd pull the stuff I liked from this one and the stuff I liked from this one, and I put them together, and boom, now this thing could work. And so I did more hackathons. I did about 42 hackathons. And so I won Harvard's hackathon and MIT's hackathon, and I won Stanford's hackathon twice. And all these schools would fly me out because I would apply, and I'd get in, and they'd cover your travel there. So if you're interested in coding, go do some hackathons. There's a lot in Europe. And then I was about to graduate, and all my friends were getting jobs at Goldman Sachs and Palantir and Facebook and McKinsey. And there was a very big pressure to go and take one of those really well-paying jobs. The problem is I didn't want to do that. I thought that was boring. I had only one internship in my entire life, and I hated it, even though the company was very cool and the CEO was really cool, but I wanted to work for myself. And so I realized by doing a lot of writing and doing a lot of reading, which is how to make really good decisions, that there was 2 options. Either I found a small startup where I really admired the leadership team and I wanted to be like them, or I just go and do my own thing. And so I found 3 companies like this that I really liked, and I messaged all of them. And none of them would agree to let me join because they wanted me to drop out of university that second to go do it. And I was a couple of months from finishing. But the problem was that none of the things that I had built so far were things that I thought would materially impact the world, right? Leave a dent. And I realized that there were criteria for the types of products that I wanted to build. First thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to build a product that could create value, and ideally for people who are similar to me. And I wanted to do something that did not only make money, but it was also really impactful in the world. And I was building a different style of app, and I realized that the text-to-speech stuff that I built, I needed to make it a little bit better to help me with this type of coding. So I started hacking on that and improving the Mac app. And I had previously made a YouTube video about how to use Speechify, and that thing got 300,000 views. And there were hundreds of comments, people saying, I'm literally crying, my 3rd grader is doing her homework by herself. But it wasn't a product, it was a hack that I built. And I'd made maybe 100 different Medium posts and YouTube videos about hacks that I had for how to bench press, how to ride a skateboard, how to do a backflip, whatever. And some of them were about software. And I realized that this was something that would be really impactful. But at the same time, I started really getting interested in narrow applications of deep learning. So within artificial intelligence, there's a subcategory called deep learning that mimics the way the brain works. And what it's really good at is pattern recognition. And so deep learning is amazing at speech synthesis, optical character recognition, taking a picture and turning something into text, transcription, translation, natural language processing, recommendation engines. And I was like, actually, I can include all this stuff together in this mini software that I built and make something that is 10x, 100x better than anything that existed before. And so what I did is I went to a local school, and I was like, hey, I made this thing. Can I talk to your kids about it? And they said yes. And the principal was like, actually, you should go to, are you going to, I need to go to this thing called the International Dyslexia Association Conference. And it was happening the next day in Florida. And I didn't have money to book a ticket, so I called United Airlines and somehow negotiated a discount on the ticket price. And I flew there without a ticket. I stayed in an Airbnb where it was happening in this huge hotel. And I just walked in and I convinced someone to give me a ticket. And that they were not using. And when the keynote speaker finished speaking, I jumped on the stage, plugged in my computer, and demoed Speechify. And there were a couple of thousand people in the audience. And when I finished, a couple of dozen people offered to fly me to their school to teach their kids how to use Speechify. And so I started flying around the US, visiting classrooms, teaching kids how to use Speechify. Fast forward, now Speechify has 25 million users. It's the #1 app in the App Store category for its category. Same thing for Chrome. There's about 100 people who work at Speechify, 72 engineers, and we hire all over the world. So I just flew in from New Delhi, India this morning, and I was in Paris before that, and I'm probably going to go to Georgia after that. 8 of us on the leadership team all live in the same house. And so we started off in Providence, Rhode Island, and then we were in San Francisco, Palo Alto, LA, Florida, New York, and right now we live in Fulham, and we're going to be there until February. One of the very first people that I hired, I found through Facebook because he was in Europe doing hackathons. His name is Simon Kostanov. He's from Bulgaria. And he just started helping me on the website for free. And then he helped me with a couple of other projects. And then I got him a visa, flew him out to California, got him an apartment, and he started as an intern. And then he became the head of iOS. And then he became the head of engineering. And then he became the head of operations. And now he's the COO of Speechify. And he's 25. The majority of the people on the leadership team at Speechify are actually 25. So Tyler, who leads the AI team, Tyler, Chaitu and Vamsi are 26 and 27. They lead product. And we have 4 core principles at the company: extreme product quality, speed, frugality, and leading with love. And so we take care of each other really like each person is your brother. You still have to really perform, but the heart emoji is the most used thing in our Slack. We tell each other I love you because we genuinely do. You're working with people day in, day out, and we really, really care for the well-being of everybody else. So Tyler, my brother, who leads the AI team at Speechify, joined us this year, 6 years into the work that we're doing at Speechify. Tyler's really smart. He started coding when he was in 3rd grade, taught us assembly in 5th grade, built 47 iPhone apps by the time he was 17, and I was always running behind Tyler trying to catch up to what he was doing while not able to spell my last name. But Tyler is blind in his left eye, and he's astigmatic in his right eye, and he does all his work on a giant projector. And so one of the things that I care the most about is that Tyler has a projector wherever we go, because I don't want his vision to deteriorate. And so there's a bunch of things like that where I watch out for them, they watch out for me, and we progress together. We recently launched audiobooks inside of Speechify. So for the first time ever, you can buy books inside of Speechify, which to me is really exciting because I listen to about 2 audiobooks a week, 100 books a year, and I've done that for the last 17 years. So my 2 favorite products, Speechify on Mac and Speechify on iOS, plus audiobooks are now combined. YC. So when you do YC, first of all, YC is an amazing program to do. I have a lot of friends who went through YC and absolutely loved it. I didn't want to do YC because I think you get like $160K or something like that in exchange for 7% of your company. I didn't think that was a good deal. And that was very contrarian. And I, by and large, make a lot of decisions that are contrarian. When I graduated school, I wrote a 30-page paper about my worldviews. And I started, what was I doing when I was a kid, and how did I make the decisions that I made about, how to be happy, and what was my top goals in life. And the first kind of big decision I made when I was 15, I was babysitting these kids, and they went to sleep, and I wrote notes about, it was a full moon, and I was like, imagine there's 30 moon wishes. What are the 30 moon wishes that you make? And I wrote 30 wishes. And then I realized I could collapse them into 3 folders. And so they were, number 1, be the best person that I can be and have kids who are greater than me. Number 2 is maximize the love in my life, whether it be for my family, friends, significant others. I think the love is the most important thing in life, and the more you give it, the more you have to give. It's like fire. You can light one flame and light another candle without extinguishing the original one, or it's like you pour out of a jug and the jug just gets bigger and bigger. And 3 is create as much value in the world as possible and elevate the collective quality of life. And by the end of this essay, I realized that the reason I am the person that I am is because I listen to 100 audiobooks a year. And it's because I benefited from my experience overcoming dyslexia when I was a kid. It just taught me to really persevere. And we could talk more about the mindset of how to build that. I decided that it didn't make sense to go work at Google because that's a shortcut to the thing that I don't want. I'm better off going to do my own thing, either working at a small startup or building my own. And the worst thing that could happen is I would fail. And I could get a job as an iOS engineer or a web developer getting paid $25 an hour at a not really good company to pay the bills. And you know what? If I go and apply to Google again 2 years from now, I'll just have a richer story. And I'm more hireable than anybody else anyway, if I did that. And I thought, I could always go live with my parents. Let's say they were so ashamed that they didn't want to let me back in the house. I have at least 15 friends that let me crash on their couch for a week each. So I would just go between their houses. And I figured it just didn't make sense to make a shortcut to the thing that I didn't want. And so what I did is I convinced 2 of my professors at Brown to sponsor me to stay as a visiting scholar. which is a position I didn't know existed, but when I read the bylaws of the school, I realized it exists. So I got to have an email, have a student ID. I convinced the meal plan to let me stay on meal plan, and I got a house with a couple of other athletes just off campus. And I just stayed at Brown for another year, building products. And partway through that year, I realized Speechify was the thing I wanted to do. And when I started visiting the first few schools, I realized how much of an impact it had on kids' lives, and that's how I decided this is the thing I'm going to stick with. I also realized that given the changes in artificial intelligence, whenever you build a product, you want to make something that could not have existed even like 2-3 years ago. Because if it could have existed, someone else would have built it. The thing is, no one could make Speechify 5 years ago because deep learning didn't exist, especially not to the fidelity that it is today. And so one of the things I'm really proud of at Speechify is we built really incredible algorithms for generating voices that sound like a real human being, like Gwyneth Paltrow and Snoop Dogg, and they're generating on your device. So we also save all the server costs. So that's part of how I made that decision. I'm going to say 2 more things, and then we're going to go to questions. Number 1, throughout this entire thing, the most important thing that I did was read books. I can't read well, so I listen. Biographies, fantasy books, spending hours feeling like you're the main character of a book helps you have the courage to make decisions that otherwise people don't make. Books about business, Traction, The Lean Startup, The 4-Hour Workweek, Never Split the Difference. I've learned more from books than I did from any time I spent in school, and I really love my time in school. And the second most important thing is the team. So I really believe, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you're going to go far, go with the team. So part of the reason I never stopped working on Speechify is because I found the right team. And there was a moment in time, this is a good time to tell this story, in 2017, where I helped 2 friends raise ICOs. They raised a tremendous amount of capital for cryptocurrencies that they were launching. And I was like, wow, if I did this, I could make a lot of money. And I had this moment, like the movie Beautiful Mind, where I had a marker and I wrote over all the windows of my apartment, trying to decide whether I stop working on Speechify and go do an ICO, or do I stick with Speechify? And I wrote, well, what are the things that I believe about something I could build today that I could not have built in the past? And the first thing that I believed was that the way people were consuming with audio was completely changing. You had all these people who started to listen to podcasts at double X speed, kind of the speed that I talk at. Double speed YouTube, double speed Netflix, double speed WhatsApp messages. And number 2, you had this unlock with artificial intelligence. And I realized the thing that I was most excited about building was something in the cross-section of both of those things. And so it didn't need to be Speechify, but it should have been something to do with audio and something to do with AI. And if you layer that with the fact that there's no other person in the world who had been listening with text-to-speech for the last 6 years who had dyslexia, then I probably should be the person who builds this. So I decided not to go into crypto. And the other point is I didn't think that crypto would create value in the next 10 years. That being said, I invested in a bunch of different projects. And now we have what just happened to FTX. And so 1, that conviction, but 2 was finding the right people to work with, right? Simon, Chaitu, Vamsi, Tyler, the people who I was working with. And I had a bunch of friends who were building startups at the same time. And I constantly was talking to them about what they were doing and supporting them and figuring out how to help them. Not because it was helpful to me, but because I really, really have their best interests at heart. There's this word in Tibetan called mudita, which is the opposite of schadenfreude. Mudita is the getting pleasure from someone else's well-being. And so that's the thing that I think about a lot. But what happened is a bunch of these friends who worked in amazing companies, and for whatever reason they sold them or it didn't work out, ended up joining Speechify 3-4 years in. And so the first 3 years were really hard. But the second 3 years were really easy because I had all these amazing friends who joined Speechify because we did have a lot of users who were using the product, and they had all this experience. They were me, the Cliff that tried to do a startup and failed and would have gone to Google. They just joined me instead.